Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and we're getting cozy today, and it's time for some Final Fantasy XIV 7.1 hot takes, people! I asked for your hottest, spiciest takes concerning Final Fantasy XIV, its current state in 7.1, and you all most certainly delivered. And now I shall react to them all, and you will join me on this wild ride. And we are going to start, by the way, spoilers for 7.1 and Dawntrail, for the MSQ and pretty much everything. Okay, we're good? We'll move ahead now. We have at Priest Eater, who says, I like the Ronique section, or segment if I could learn to read, and the accompanying Hitsaro lore, and the big rock T-Rex had a cool visual design. Now, if you've been following my coverage of 7.1, you'll know that I'm not that big of a fan. In fact, I didn't like the section with Kona in 7.1. I thought it felt like a really slow slog in a lot of places. I wasn't a fan of the actual solo instance. But I can understand why some people like this section, because at the end of the day, people like different kinds of world building. And that's what that section largely was. It was fleshing out the backstory of Kona while also developing that part of the world that was kind of underdeveloped in 7.0. I think largely speaking, it's like relatively fine. And the actual character development we got for Kona, I thought was rather good. My issue, and where I took issue with this section, was the activities that we were doing in that location. Like learning about how they utilize the feces of the Ronique, or just petting a bunch of Ronique. That's not the stuff that appeals to me personally, so it felt very slow. But some people are a fan of that slower, more methodical world building, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just personally, that's not the direction I would want to see in the future. Though Final Fantasy XIV is notorious for having sections like this throughout its entire life. It's nothing new. It's just outside of Alexandria, I don't personally care that much about Tyrol at all. So having a section dedicated to developing a section of Tyrol is not going to appeal to me because I already don't care about the location. But if that location already does appeal to you and you want to learn more about it, then I can imagine that section being rather serviceable in that regard. And yeah, the T-Rex guy was pretty cool. He looked like he belonged as a dungeon boss somewhere else. Now let's move on to at Lauchi Tech, who says, quote-unquote, Sphene, who is dead, showing up at the end of 7.1, I told you there would be spoilers, is exactly the same plot framing as Oddbut, who is dead, showing up at the end of 5.1. We just reposting Shadowbringer's homework but changing it a bit, ... There is the fear, because there were quite a few sections throughout 7.0 that felt like they were just retreading similar plot beats and story beats that they've done before, like Living Memory feeling very close to Ultima Thule in terms of overall narrative construction. It's not the same, but broad brushstroke speaking, it's very similar. I think Jesse Cox puts it very well in that Dawntrail and its overall story is kind of like Wuklamot going throughout A Realm Reborn through Endwalker for us, but for her, just in a far expedited form. So you can have these sections that feel very narratively similar to what we've done, because that's probably the point. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about that, and I think the writing of Wuklamot and the story itself kind of lets down what they're going for in that regard. But either way, I hope it isn't just retreading what we already did with Elidibus. I still have enough faith that they will take this in a different direction slightly, or at least do something cool and interesting with it, because I actually do like the character of Sphene. I like Alexandria. I think that stuff is rather cool, and I am interested to see where this is going, especially with either the old Sphene or some other version of Sphene coming back in the post-credit scene. In the meanwhile, I think we're at this like fork in the road where this Sphene story could either go the exact same path as Elidibus, in which case that would just be old and tired, or they can tackle it with a new light in a different direction and make it cool and interesting. I'm hoping they go that route, but I think we really need 7.2 to be really sure, though I understand people's trepidations about this storyline. We have at Luca the Rexcario with a take that is a hybrid between a theory and a take. I think at the end of the Dawntrail MSQ story, we will find a way to restore Living Memory, but not to the state that was originally. I doubt they have the balls to leave Living Memory in the actual state it is right now. I will be happily surprised if they do. And yeah, the Living Memory situation has been a bit of a hot topic throughout the life of Dawntrail so far, because it is a really ballsy decision. because you take a zone, which is arguably one of the coolest and most beautiful zones in the game, and then throughout the story, you turn it into a zone that's just kind of drab and boring. And like, that is deliberate, right? It works for the story, but at the end of the day, it is an MMORPG, and while there are workarounds if you want to see living memory the way it used to be, no matter what decision you make with the actual story, you will have people that are upset about it because at the end of the day, the zone looks worse for a lot of people. Now, personally, I do appreciate the idea that we can like change the actual world throughout our actions. We can change these zones in massive ways. I like that feeling that the world is not static, that it can morph and change because of our actions. I like that element. Was it the most well executed here with living memory? Probably not, but I appreciate that they were willing to drastically change a zone like that. I think that is personally a good sign for what they are willing to do in the future when it comes to zone design. It also kind of raises the stakes in certain ways, that we can fundamentally alter these zones throughout our actions, whether that's good or bad. We've done that in the past, but it was largely just skyboxes we changed, or something that was added to the sky. This is like fundamentally changing the feeling of a zone. I think that is cool. And while yeah, I do think the original living memory did look better, I'm personally glad that they're willing to make decisions like this. Now, with them seemingly focusing in on living memory and the endless with this like 7.1 to 7.3 story for Dawntrail, I wouldn't be surprised if we see something else for living memory, especially since, you know, the totally not Sphene character wants to create even more endless at this point, while the original Sphene or some other Sphene are woke in living memory, and that was where the meanwhile was. The emphasis seems to be on Alexandria and especially the living memory going into the future. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were willing to do it once, if they're willing to do something else for living memory going into the future. It will be interesting to see. Now for some really spicy takes, because we have two takes that kind of tackle the same idea, so I want to take them together here. We have at Lens Hunter, who says, I think the story in The War Within, World of Warcraft's latest expansion, was better than Dawntrail. That's a spicy take. But we also have at Channel Raznov, who says, gacha games currently have better writing and voice acting than Final Fantasy XIV. Wuthering Waves is a good example. I talked about this a while ago in that you have this current changing landscape when it comes to MMORPGs, because if you are somebody who loved a living, breathing world and wanted to see that singular world be updated throughout multiple patches and possibly expansions or just updates going into the future, and you want to take a bunch of time into that one game, you were kind of stuck with MMORPGs. The big dog in the playground was World of Warcraft for the longest time, then Final Fantasy XIV burst onto the scene. You have a bunch of smaller games, don't get me wrong, but now we are also seeing other games appeal to that same idea, but also do it well. I am a big fan of Wuthering Waves, and I think it started pretty lackluster with 1.0. It has become absolutely phenomenal with 1.3 and the latest patch 1.4. Like, it's incredible quality that they are pumping out rather consistently now with Wuthering Waves. And honestly, yeah, I think the storytelling in 1.3 and 1.4 for Wuthering Waves appealed to me more than the storytelling I've seen throughout Dawntrail in 7.1. There are elements I still really like in Dawntrail, don't get me wrong, mainly with Alexandria because I'm a fan of FF9, and also I think that the themes and the tone of Alexandria far more appeal to me, but we no longer live in an age where it's like, if you want this kind of gameplay experience of this world that evolves over time, you have to play an MMORPG. Quite a few gacha games, for instance, do a really good job of this, and arguably at a more reasonable price point for a lot of people. Because yeah, gacha gaming can be predatory in that regard, because duh. A lot of those games though, you can just play strictly free to play. I do that. And instead of having to fork over money for an expansion and a monthly sub, you get those games for free. That's a far more reasonable price point for a lot of people out there. And I think at large, if you want to compete in that ever-evolving and changing environment, you have to be willing to and capable of putting that quality that you were known for onto the table each time. I think 14 stumbled a bit when it came to Dawntrail, but I'm not as doom about Final Fantasy XIV as a lot of like internet comments are out there. But I don't think Dawntrail was that particularly good. I think 7.1 was a massive step in the right direction. It wasn't without faults, but it's a step in the right direction. And with the likely places they will go with this story into the future in the long term, I think Final Fantasy XIV will be fine in this regard. But a few years ago, Final Fantasy XIV, for a lot of people, myself included, just ripped the notion that, like, MMORPGs can't have an engaging story. There have been others that have done it, but Final Fantasy XIV was on another level. And while I haven't played The War Within myself yet, I'll be diving into it relatively soon, from what I've seen of it, Blizzard is also righting their ship when it comes to the storytelling and the world building of World of Warcraft. It's not perfect, but they're heading in massive ways in the right direction. And what I'm largely getting at with these 2 points is that Final Fantasy XIV has competition. And that is good, because ideally that would make Final Fantasy XIV strive for ever greater heights, while also, ideally, the quality of Final Fantasy XIV will make these other experiences strive to be even better, which is what I think we have seen with World of Warcraft, where they have recently doubled down on storytelling and world building, and a continuous narrative throughout multiple expansions, and I think that is largely because of, one, the negative reception that Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands developed for the game, but also just how good and well received Final Fantasy XIV was, largely because of the story. I think a lot of the times we can get caught up in, like, these sports team-esque debates where it's like, my game is better than yours or whatnot or whatever. The ideal situation is that you have a bunch of these games doing very well so that they spur each other on to be even better, because that just makes, at the end of the day, better experiences for us, the consumer. I don't want Final Fantasy XIV to be the lone dog in the yard. I want there to be competition. I want there to be good competition. I'm glad that these gacha games are providing this high level of an experience. I really do think Wuthering Waves is that good. Like, honestly, I would put it in, like, my nominees for Game of the Year. It's not my Game of the Year, but it's high up there for me. It's really dang good now. And while Blizzard isn't perfect, they've been going in a far better direction lately, and quickly. They've been pumping out content, trying to tell a consistent story, trying to develop the world, trying to put down foreshadowing. These are things I want out of Final Fantasy XIV, and that they still do. But I want to see them do it better, and I think we're starting to see that with 7.1, but, you know, time will tell. And now we have at Jack Lee Rivoli, who says, Viper is the most boring job in the game. My retort would be Summoner. I've been playing a little bit of Summoner for role quests, and by God. You ever just know a job is not designed to appeal to you? That's me with Summoner at this point. I miss what it used to be. I really do. I don't miss the dots, personally. Just ever since the Endwalker redesign of Summoner, I just have not vibed with it. I like Viper a little bit. Like, it is really simple and streamlined. Every now and then, though, playing Viper for a few minutes, I don't mind it. I would never want to play Viper, though, for, like, more than 2 duties in a row. That would just get really boring for me. It's one of the reasons I've just largely gone to tanking when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV. I just prefer the job design at this point. There will be people out there that like those fast, simple, but also fast jobs. I like them when they're done well. I'm just not that big on Viper. Though, again, if we're talking about most boring job in the game, I would just be, like, side-eyeing Summoner here. In before the Summoner mains try and kill me. Now, to wrap it all up, we have at McGregor1000 who says, the MSQ is criminally overrated. 90% of people that quit the game don't make it to the latest expansion. New players should be encouraged to boost and then decide if they want to do 400 hours of bad filler questing and poorly paced story delivery. So I disagree. I used to be of the opinion that I thought Final Fantasy XIV, they probably will in the future, have to have some way to expedite new players into current content, because trying to get somebody into a game and then saying, okay, well, if we want to play together with the current content, you're going to have to do like 500 hours of a story. That is like the easiest way to get someone turned off from a game. However, I think there's ways around it, because I think there is no substitute for how engaged with the world and the game overall the MSQ gets a lot of people. And players, no matter what we say, no matter what we can try and advocate, at the end of the day, it's an MMORPG. People will go the path of least resistance. And if you give people a way to circumvent the MSQ and go around it and not have to interface with it, there will be a lot of people out there that just simply don't. And you won't get the investment, you won't get a lot of the training that the MSQ actually does for new players in getting people accustomed to the way that Final Fantasy XIV does mechanics, the way they pace fights. You won't get any of that investment. And I think in the long term, that has more irreparable harm, because once you pull that ripcord, you can't put it back in. But I do think it's a bit of a balancing act, because at some point, too much is too much. Like, what happens 3 expansions from now? Is the new play experience supposed to be A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, Endwalker, Dawntrail, 8.0, 9.0, 10.0? Now you can get caught up with 11.0? Like, is that the long-term play? Because I don't think that's tenable. It's an issue every MMORPG runs into when they go long enough. You are building this world and building this story off the back of all that came before. If you have a lot of people, especially new players, just skip that, it will undercut everything you try to do to retain those people with the new story. And you can argue, just make it optional. What we talked about before though, MMORPG players and people at large will go the path of least resistance. I think the MSQ is that good. Is it perfect? No. Are there lulls in it? Yes. Are there spots that could be absolutely streamlined in the future like they already did before with the patch content of A Realm Reborn? Absolutely. Would I like to see A Realm Reborn even further streamlined? Yes. I think there's ways to go around this than simply saying, okay, you're a new player, now you start at level 100, now we move. At the end of the day, Final Fantasy XIV is largely based and predicated on its story, on its narrative, on its world. There's no substitute for its story. There just isn't. There's no new experience that you could make that would last like 30 minutes to an hour that would replicate that level of engagement that the MSQ gives you. Those emotional highs of the Stormblood patches, or of Heavensward, or of Shadowbringers, or of Endwalker. There's no substitute for that because it all builds on each other. What you could maybe do in the future is give people an expedited way to get into the modern game, but heavily incentivize New Game Plus to go back and do the actual story, but just leisurely and at your own time. Like maybe give people a bunch of scripts, or just heavily increase the rewards of doing that story for the first time. Like, oh, if you want to play with everybody in the new content, here you go, here's your new job. If you want to really fast track and level up your alts though, do the MSQ, and we'll give you a bunch of XP for doing so. That could be one way to go about it. I don't think the answer is wholesale removing the MSQ, but if you're going to put it as side or optional content, you have to heavily incentivize it so most people at the end of the day will still do it, because there is no substitute for it in my opinion. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. We got through all those hot takes, and if you have more hot takes for me to react to in the future, leave a comment down below. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and help support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.